what happens regularly that would horrify a person from 100 years ago. The amount of single people in their 20s and 30s. No joke. My great grandpa took the horse and buggy to the church across the river and asked for a wife. He returned a week later and they gave him a woman who was 21. She was considered nearly unmarriable due to her advanced age. They of course then went back to the farm and had 12 children that survived to adulthood as you did back then. I would like one wife, please. Would you like to supersize her for 75 cents more? People taking fat from their butts and putting it in their cheeks. Or worse, lips. People taking lips from their butts and putting them in their cheeks. Instructions unclear. I put my ass on my lips in my cheeks and my cheeks on my ass. The way people are dressed, men not in suits, would be seen as uneducated production workers. And women wearing shorts and clothes-fitting clothes would be seen as promiscuous. FWIW. Grainy black and white photographs are hiding lots of stained and frayed fabric. Sure, suits and ties were a lot more common. But for a lot of guys, it was their only suit, and they had been wearing it for years and years. And the fabric was dotted with patched over rips. I think your average 1920 apostrophe would be super impressed by how bright and clean everybody's clothes are these days. That's also true. And that we don't have to wear the same shoes for 10 years. Patching them up. We also have to replace them every 6 months to a year. As the lack of cobblers makes shoe repair somewhat difficult. They had professionals who could adjust your shoe to fit you. Or make one from scratch. Different times. I gotta admit. Getting custom kicks and hopping over to the haberdashery to get a hat that fits correctly would be awesome as hell. Edit. I'm learning a lot about cobblers from around the world. This is nice stuff to hear. I've always had respect for skilled labor. Really weird, but in my culture girls weren't allowed to eat a specific type of food because it was reserved for males. So just the side/idea of women enjoying the food 100 years later would really duck them up. Can you explain it in more detail? Women mostly weren't allowed to eat food rich in protein. The references I'll be using aren't from personal experience because that wasn't something that was practiced in my household. But eggs, for example. It was believed that if you ate eggs you would become sterile, among other things. There's also this specific type of meat. I tried asking my sister but she too forgot the name, but women weren't allowed to eat it and I don't know the reason. But it tastes great, so maybe that's the reason. Apparently you also were told not to eat meat from a cow because your child would be born fat. It's weird, man. But it all revolves around food that are often associated with luxury. Luxury meaning food that are just known for being delicious and are usually cooked on special occasions and shit. I don't know. I'm really horrible at explaining things. And I don't know this in full detail. So that's all I can offer. Mostly cultures in Western African countries. Most music probably. Imagine people from 100 years ago listening to WAP. Figuring they understand what the slang words mean. Death metal would be a bit of a surprise to them. They'd think it was satanic devil worship music lol. But introduce them to Christian metal lol. Oh, I got a good one. Birth control. Amen. Diaphragms and condoms were a thing in 1920. But their availability was pretty limited in most countries. To the point that many couples had no idea they were an option. You had to get a hold of literature that described contraception, which was illegal for organizations to send through the mail, at least in the US. So you basically had to wait for an activist to come around door to door. Then, once you decided you wanted some of those, you had to find a sympathetic pharmacist and discreetly inquire. If you were an unmarried woman, they'd probably refuse to sell to you. As an illustrative example, take my ancestors. My great grandma, Mary, had 10 kids, and the youngest, Rita, was born in 1922. 20 years went by and Rita was in college. Mary, a high school dropout, was reading the paper, and it mentioned that a certain state was considering a bill to legalize contraceptive use within marriage. Mary turned to her more educated daughter and said, "Rita, I don't recognize this word in the paper. What's a contraceptive?" Rita always swore, later, that she didn't blush while discreetly explaining. But she fully admitted that she did laugh when her mother's response was, "Wait, To stop you from getting pregnant? Why would anyone want to do that? Apostrophe. I sometimes wonder what Mary would say if she could see her 5 dozen great grandkids, each of them with only 0 to 4 children apiece. I guess she was happy with 10, but I don't think any of us would sign on for it. That's a cool ass story to be able to share about your family. I enjoyed reading it a lot. Women's fashion. Knees were considered scandalous. Knees, I was going to say premarital sex. In the 1930s 1950s TV and movies were strictly regulated, so they couldn't say anything scandalous. This could be as tame as a man and a woman sleeping in the same bed. Imagine how someone from 1940s would react if we showed him an episode from any HBO show. I was going to say premarital sex. Gay premarital sex. The implication from premarital would probably be the most disturbing for many people from a century ago. Close bracket. OMG gay pre-relationship sex. Drones bro. Duck in drones. Basically anything high-tech. Want to fly across the Atlantic? Well, let me book a flight on my smartphone. You'll be there in a couple hours. Of course the current pandemic might make this a bit more difficult now. But anyway, want to know the weather over there? Let me look it up. Want to see pictures of your destination we took from space? Here you go. 1920s person. So aeroplanes are now a regular means of travel? Apostrophe. 2020s person. Yeah. The technology developed rapidly after World War II. Apostrophe. 1920s. World War what? Apostrophe. 2020s. Oh. You might want to sit down for this. Apostrophe. At least they already know about the Great War. WW1. It's probably why they'd be terrified of a WW2. Imagine living through that nightmare, thinking that the world must have learned a painful lesson after your nation and others are left hanging by a thread, only to find that it will happen again in your lifetime. Yeah. So it was a lot like the Great War, except the Great War was kind of just the warm-up act. Apostrophe. I remember reading once something to the effect of, so, how many buildings does it blow up? Apostrophe. No, sir. It blows up whole cities. Apostrophe. So how many planes to destroy that city? Apostrophe. Actually, it's how many cities can we destroy with that plane? Now, in fact, you don't even need a plane. We have intercontinental ballistic missiles now with multiple independent re-entry vehicles after going up to space and back down again. Apostrophe. Hollop. What's space? The amount of stuff we waste and let go to waste. One thing my grandma told me is, if you're full and you eat so you don't waste it, you're still wasting it. But now you also get all the extra calories. Yep. This is why I don't tell my kids to clean their plates. If they tell me they are full, I simply remind them that there's no snacks for a few hours. If they are on the edge of being full but could still eat a little, they will. Most of the time they do not. I think self-regulation with eating is a very crucial thing for kids to learn. Yes, it is crucial. Actually, studies show that young kids are very good at regulating hunger and knowing when they should stop eating. Turns out we get worse as we get older due to a number of factors, including the clean your plate type rules. I took a nutrition over the life cycle class in graduate school. Great class. Why aren't you going to church? Why are you dressed like that? Why are you drinking from the same water fountain as that guy? The amount of atheists would give a person from 100 years ago a heart attack. The amount of open Satanists, given the satanic panic, witch hunts, exorcisms, etc. in the past. I think people from 100 plus years ago would vastly overestimate the number of Satanists. The Satanic Temple is a minority within a minority. They're atheists who are fine with being alienated in order to preserve separation of church and state. I think even now there are far fewer Satanists than a time traveler from the past would assume. Also, groups like the Church of Satan are openly atheistic, using satanic imagery to mock the Christian ideology they find distasteful. Active members are just atheists who've had it with Christian bullshit ruining everything. So, a lot of ex-Christians then. Explains why they seem to know the Bible so well. The fact people will eat ass, but not the first piece of bread in the loaf. I eat that slice of bread. Amma. You are what you eat, my friend. touched by everyone but chosen by none. Visibly disabled people being out in public without being part of some kind of entertainment like a freak show. From 1867 to 1974 many US cities had laws that said people who were diseased, maimed, mutilated or deformed in any way so as to be an unsightly or disgusting object were not allowed in public and could be arrested for it. So seeing us out and about now would be pretty shocking. I think modern people underestimate how common it was for people to have visual disfigurations in the days before nutritional deficiencies were less common than they are now. Seeing bodily differences in people suffering from something like rickets or scurvy wasn't rare at all. Pretty sure the pace at which the world is improving and evolving. Look at the technology nowadays. Pretty sure each day they bring out a new and improved chip or whatnot. It's insane to think about. People in 1920 thought the world was changing pretty fast, and one could make a case that they would have seen more change in their lifetime than we have. An adult in 1920, born 1900 or earlier, would have been born before airplanes existed, when cars and radio were still a novelty, and there was no such thing as a feature film. If you wanted to hear music, you played it yourself, sang, or went to a concert. Unless you were one of the few people rich enough to buy one of the first wax cylinder phonographs. All that had changed by 1920. In the US, women had the vote by 1920 and were starting to cut their hair and wear skirts that didn't sweep the floor. Prohibition had gone into effect. The Great War had devastated a generation of young men in Western Europe and changed social mores throughout the West. The Bolsheviks had killed the Tsar and taken over the former Russian Empire. The Panama Canal had been completed, saving 500 nautical miles and revolutionizing world trade. Between 1900 and 1920 we figured out how to do safe blood transfusions, and x-rays became a hospital staple. We were on the brink of discovering insulin, so that diabetes would no longer be a death sentence. From 2000 to today, most changes about making existing technology faster, more efficient, and in the case of phones and computers, smaller. Graphics have become better. Instead of Ethernet cables, we are wireless. There have been few, if any, changes to our daily lives as radical as seeing streets full of horses become streets full of cars, or seeing airplanes go from a couple of hobbyists' clever toy to seeing them used in combat. When my great-grandma had a baby at a hospital, her bill was $80. She stayed into hospital for about a week, which I think was normal back then. When my sister had her baby, it was $35. 000. Neither of them had any complications. Is that normal for the US now? That's crazy. In the UK it costs a person nothing at all, apart from a small deduction from taxes every year, but there is no upfront cost at all. Yep, Americans always say oh, but you have to pay TARS. So it's not actually free. Well, Karen, we pay more or less in taxes as you pay for health insurance. Only our taxes fully cover all necessary treatments, while your insurance covers only some treatments, and even then you have to pay thousands out of pocket. And I'm happy that my national insurance/health tax helps out others, because I very rarely made use of it, because I'm not a dick. And that right there is why America can't have nice things. Taxes are theft. Apostrophe. Government is not the answer. Government is the problem. Apostrophe. It should be up to me if I help someone else or not. Apostrophe. If you tell people they have to wear a mask, less people will wear masks, just out of spite. Apostrophe. There are numerous devices in my house that look like weird windows that sometimes make a sound. Then I touch the screen, and then another person is just there, talking to me. It's clearly magic or a portal to another realm. Also imagine a laptop. What does that weird looking plastic book do? How many people are open about having mental illnesses and that they're actually very common and definitely do not require lobotomies? The plethora of graphic porn available. I once read a shower thought that said I could see more naked women in 5 minutes on the internet than my great-grandfather could have seen in his lifetime. As my friend put it, average porn watcher has seen way more dicks than an old Babylonian temple hooker. Or as I like to put it, I have seen more and much prettier women than any king or emperor in history. For women, having only one children with a partner of your choice that you might have met when you traveled far away by yourself after turning 30 and having spent your 20s working or in higher education, instead of, like, having 10 kids hoping 1 or 2 would survive. / for an arbitrary definition of far away that could be from the next state to another continent, or the vast amount of women choosing to be child-free and taking their bodily autonomy into their own hands. The advent of birth control is the thing that enabled both of these options. Hormonal BC really has changed the world. A lot of the surgery procedures that we have today come up a lot in old literature. Transplants, brain surgery, especially while conscious, artificial limbs or any other machines that can be put in the body. Just think of explaining to some from a century ago about how face transplants are a thing now. To be honest, a lot in that field is held back by the concept of ethics. In the 50s, a Russian doctor successfully transplanted a dog brain into another dog and kept it alive. Among other things, we could be way ahead with transplantation etc. if we wanted to. Women doing all the same things men do. My dad told me my great grandma couldn't have property at her name. Women couldn't own houses. She realized this when she divorced with my great grandpa. This was only done by word because you couldn't actually change the papers because no, and she wanted to sell the house to buy a new one. But she actually couldn't buy the new house at her name, only the husband could do that. She later bought the house at her son's name, my grandpa, but holy duck, that would be annoying. I met a woman who told me she was the first in her part of Nova Scotia to get a business loan and house on her own. The bank wouldn't let her because she was a woman and unmarried, but she was relentless and they eventually gave in. And she wasn't even that old. It happened in the 1970s/80s. She is in her late 60s now, so this was fairly recent. Yeah, I would be so mad if I were in that situation. Let's see. 1920 aka roaring 20s. They had just come out of a world war and a pandemic. The stock markets were booming. They had cars and planes and phones and radio and transatlantic cables. Private and public debauch were at an all-time high. Don't think much of what we get up to would surprise, let alone horrify, these peeps. FR people are saying stuff like planes, cars, guns. Semi-auto guns existed in 1920, rare. Planes existed, rare. And cars existed, common. It is basically expected that existing technologies will improve. If a person from 2070 comes to us and says in the future, phones and computers are faster, I don't think any jaws will drop. Smartphones are the thing that would make them lose their shit. You have the entire knowledge of human history available in your pocket, and you can talk to anyone you know, and play stupid games, and have an endless supply of any weird porn you like. That is the thing that was unthinkable back then. If you enjoy watching these videos, make sure to hit the subscribe button and like this video. Thanks.